I'm going to tell you the stories of some Afghan women I met and actually redo your introduction. I started the Afghan Women's Project in 2002 when, if you knew about Afghan women or saw them in the media at that time, they were all these poor victims who needed us to save them. And so, actually, my photographs are not going yet. Oh, yeah, it was so hard to take that picture. It's one of my prize winners. And really, we can't start until the pictures start. So just click on that. There we go. Okay, so in 2002, the image of Afghan women in the media were these poor, helpless victims. And at the same time, I was invited to a reception for 14 Afghan women who came to Austin, Texas, where I live. And the women at this reception were so different. They were very much like you or I or other people that we know. And because I'm a professional photographer, because I have a lot of experience traveling in the Middle East and beyond, I got inspired, and I felt that I should go to Afghanistan to bring back a more complete picture. And it's not that the stereotypes we have are necessarily wrong, it's that there's a lot more out there. So I put together the project. I traveled to Afghanistan in 2003 and 2010, and afterwards, as I said, I give lectures and I wrote the book about it. But also, one of the things that really touched me about the whole thing was the whole concept of bearing witness, and especially in 2003, because here I was a person who came all the way from America to hear your story and to bring it back and share it with the world. And I believe that that had a lot of healing influence on the women that I talked to. In a minute, the slide will come up. But the first woman I'm going to share with you is Sahra. And she was a filmmaker. She was raised in Tehran, in Iran, because her family had exiled there. And she was an actress during high school. Well, within the Afghan community, she received a lot of censure because it's just not a proper thing for a girl to be. And she struggled against it, and as soon as she got out of high school, she was out of there and had won a scholarship to work in Slovakia, to study there. And so after she got her PhD, she was decided that she wanted to go back to Afghanistan because she wanted to make films about Afghan women. And she realized to do that, she would have to live that experience. She went back to Kabul, and because her mother was still in Iran and because her father had passed away, she was living on her own. And the problem with that, it's actually a kind of dangerous thing. You're very vulnerable as a single woman living alone in an apartment or something in Afghanistan. So she began getting texts from one of her fans. And he was asking her to come and have tea with him. So after a while, she agreed to do that, and they met several times, and she liked him well enough. So when he proposed marriage, she accepted. But she said, I'll marry you, but you have to know my first love is film. And this is the most important thing in my life, and so everything else takes a back seat. Well, they got married, and she's a very modern woman, and she moved in with his family, who is very traditional. But they're traditional in the old sense of Afghan traditional. And so traditionally Afghan people are really quite open, and they allow differences, and they respect people. And really the love and respect is what helps them make that relationship work. In fact, Sahra told me that her sister-in-law wears a burqa and she doesn't. And she said that she talked to her brother-in-law about it and explained that the Quran does not mandate covering the face. And so her sister-in-law doesn't wear a burqa anymore. And it's because of this really loving communication between them. And I think she's just beautiful. She lives in Slovakia now, and teaches classes in film directing. Yeah, she has a lot of sides to her. Sahra was, She's a lot like me in a way because she is very independent and needs time alone to create. And Afghans are not like that. They tend to be very communal and family-oriented. And so a lot of times they lose their sense of self. And that's one thing about Sahra, was that she had a very strong sense of self. She told me that she sings opera in her family. And you know, they don't stop her, and she doesn't make them do what she does. So the next woman I'm going to talk about is Mariam, and Mariam's a photographer, and we really enjoyed each other a lot. And some of the photographs you'll be seeing are photographs we saw on an excursion we went on. Well, Mariam was working for an aid organization, and one day her boss came to her and asked if she would please go across the country to Herat to translate. And Mariam said, "Oh, my father would never let me do that." But the boss said, "Well, we really, really need you." So she came home with Mariam, and they all sat down with her father, and they drank tea. And at the end, her father said, "You know, you're a guest in my home, so I can't refuse you. I'll let her go." So they went. Everything was perfectly smoothly. A couple weeks later, her boss approached her again and said, "Mariam, we need you to go back." And Mariam expected that she would be able to go. But instead, her father said, "What? I let you go last time, and now you come asking me again? No, of course I can't let you go." And Mariam begged and pleaded, and finally, her father relented. And the thing is that she was able to go, and because of that, she was able to travel to Holland, to India for training, different training courses that she went on. But the thing, too, is that she was not going out on a trip with girlfriends. She was earning money when she did this. And the money she earned would pay for schooling for her brother. And that's another thing, is like when Afghan kids earn money, the money all goes back into the family. And it's really very often spent on education. Fatima lives in Bamiyan province. She's the director of Women's Affairs, and she was the one who brought the battered women's shelter to Bamiyan. There are 11 shelters all over Afghanistan. 5 of them are in Kabul. And the parliament in Afghanistan decided that battered women's shelters are actually fronts for prostitution. So they passed a law saying that, number one, the shelters all need to be inspected, which means that people would know their location, and that if the husbands wanted their wives back, they could go to the shelter and get them back. Well, we all know how horrible that is. So what happened was that in Afghanistan, there are not only aid organizations, but there are a lot of Afghan civil society organizations, and they all banded together to fight that. I actually received a petition that they wanted me to sign to fight this law. And I thought, what member of parliament is going to listen to an infidel feminist? No, they're not going to. But actually that petition went to the State Department, and Hillary got it, and so the whole State Department put pressure on Karzai and the parliament, along with those other organizations, and one of the organizations made a presentation to Parliament about how important the shelters are. And so as a result, then the person who initiated that law apologized. And there was actually more funding that became available for the shelters. And so they still have challenges, but they're legitimized in the eyes of people. I met Haji Gulale, and I asked her, she told me that in her life, the most important thing was her trip on the Hajj to Mecca. And she said that when she went, she told me all about it, but she said the most important part was forgiveness, that she was able to feel forgiven by God, and she was able to forgive people who had wronged her in her life. I asked a lot of the Afghan women that I interviewed, what about Islam is good for women? And invariably they said education, because it says education for girls and boys. Also, they said Islam gives us our rights. I thought, what? I mean, there's a huge difference between American civil law and Islamic law. But Afghan women aren't looking at it like that. They're comparing Islamic law to traditional law, and in which case women have no rights at all. And so really, if people practice Islam, then the lives of women will be much, much better than they are. Now, I got to visit the Mini Mobile Children's Circus. And when I was inside this compound, I couldn't help but feel happy. There would be kids zipping by on rollerblades. There would be kids juggling. And here's the juggling house, actually. They would be doing acrobatics. And I started thinking, and it's like, wait a minute. Here's an NGO spending all this money and time on kids having fun. Don't they know there's a lot of serious problems in Afghanistan that need serious solutions? But then I realized, maybe this is the most important work of all. These kids, some of them were alive during the last years of the Taliban, but all of them were undergoing the reconstruction of their country where resources are scarce, and none of them got to have a childhood like you or I might imagine, and that we know is important for the development of a good human being. So they get to give performances, they get confidence by performing. They also get to be role models for other kids so that other kids can see that, maybe they can do something besides just what their society says. So there's other programs like Skateistan and other things too that are very important for the children. Naja was married to a mild-mannered man, but her husband's father was kind of a bully. And so they were all living together, and one day she just couldn't take it anymore, and she called a meeting of the family. And she said, look, I would get divorced, except that I know that I would lose my sons, and I'm not willing to do that. So let's work something out. What can we do? They talked about it. It was decided that Naja and her husband would live separately. And as I was congratulating her about that, she said, Peggy, this never would have happened except that I'm educated and that I'm a main breadwinner of the family. And those two things were really, really important. The thing is that in Naja's case, this was really good. But a lot of times, interventions that we want to make that we really do see as good things, they have unintended consequences. And in this particular thing, it turns society upside down because in the old days, it was the elders who had the power of the family. And so we just need to know what those unintended consequences are so we can mitigate them and know what to expect. This is a sign for a high school. And Dr. Sakina Yakubi, number one, she founded a lot of secret schools during the Taliban. She also started the Afghan Institute of Learning. And they focus a lot on teacher training in modern teaching methods. But they also, when they build schools, and they do it mostly in rural areas, they go into the community and they really have the support of the community, and it's really a partnership with the community, which is why they succeed. So one time they were in a village and they were discussing what the school would entail. And she said, yes, we have schools for the children, and then we have literacy classes for older people, and we have workshops that we offer women. And these workshops are on nutrition. You can choose what you want, nutrition or childcare or how to earn money or something. And the women said, no, we have heard about your course on human rights, and that's the course we want. So they would go to the workshop, and then they come home and they said, well, it says here in the Quran that our girls have to go to school as well as our boys, and that education's really important. It says here in the Quran that we need to be kind to each other, that you and I are partners in our family, and we need to treat each other that way. And so when they did the evaluations at the end of it, it came out that that was actually changed their lives so much, more than anything else. I'm going to leave you with Fatima. If you read The Gathering Strength, you'll see her as Anisa because her family didn't want her to be in the book, so I took out her picture and changed her name. And as we all know, the future belongs to the young people, but I say the future of Afghanistan belongs not to Fatima, but to Fatima's children and her grandchildren. And we in the West have a way of looking at things according to the budget cycles. We judge our success if it's successful by the end of the budget cycle or by the election cycle. And really, we need to take a much longer-term view. Another thing is that we need the interventions that we do. We need to ask Afghan women what they want and focus on those particular issues, not looking ourselves as like, oh, I think you might need this or that, but really what are their core needs. But so that's my presentation. And I encourage you to get Gathering Strength, Conversations with Afghan Women. It can really break open a lot of stereotypes and give you avenues of hope into the coming future that they face. Thank you very much.